Hello out there, all my friends who love poetry. I'm glad to be able to read to you from my newest book, published in January 2022. And the title, And Sometimes Dreaming. Let me tell you about why I chose the title. All my life I've been a great dreamer, which doesn't mean that all my dreams make sense. But some of them tell a story, and I've chosen 22 or 23 dreams that do tell a story. I won't read all of them. The majority of the book is a diverse selection, not about dreams, every single poem, because there are, I believe, 115 poems, yes, and some of them are on political and social issues. But I thought just to give you some sense and some understanding of how poets can also be rather humorous, I'd start with my first dream poem, which does start the book. And it's called Akin to Madness? And I've thoughtfully labeled all dream poems dream poem. My best down pillows on my bed, I, weary, rest my sleepy head. An hour passes, 2, 3, and soon I see dreams more sharply, the more vaguely drawn. The shadows are quite well defined till dawn, though all flee before I can remind myself that each one in this dream sequence has perished. I'm saddened. Some I had once cherished. Night wears slowly on. Birds tweet at the approach of day. The sharper drawn of this old cast, I find, dissolves into and out my largely pleasant past to overtake my mind. It keeps me from all peace, which in some suitcase I have left behind. In truth, I can't describe these icons from my youth. A few, I think, intent on harming me in truth. I drive down mountains in cars they lent me without brakes. Was my inability to halt my fault implicitly? I can't determine, and am puzzled in my dream, where muzzled I cannot charge the lender of duplicity. No matter, since I stop. On exiting, I find the car is balanced on the very edge, not of a mountain ledge, but of Rockefeller Center, Manhattan. I landed here to hop a ferry out to Staten. I managed safely to escape. A child from my old school calls me a fool because I didn't know that 12 times 12 made 144. In short pants, he asks if I'm still sore. He ties a large umbrella to my waist when I say no. And climbing in, we float in space to 42nd Street below. No haste. Landing on a traffic island. An Irish, German-speaking cop tickets us for slowing traffic's flow. I start to dream of restrooms, and there are none, but I need to go. This Irish guardian of the peace writes out his ticket in Chinese, then vanishes as neatly as you please. Only after that, because my big toe's itching, I kick my covers off and twitching, wake. It's now 8:30, and the sun is up, for heaven's sake. Are dreams akin to madness? Might that be true? Or do we dream because there's little else most nights to do? Well, there's a bit of everything in there. It's called Akin to Madness, and I am obviously reviewing my third grade year in the country in upstate New York. That little boy who tied the umbrella around me was a child in third grade, but I never took a trip such as that and landed in Rockefeller Center. I got to New York several times, mostly to attend conventions of historians, because before I started writing poetry, I wrote 4 books on European history. Well, that's neither here nor there. This is the third poem in the book, and it's called Amends. Shall we make amends? And mending what miscarried in the past, weave stronger ties that last. Or shall we go our separate ways, so that we never ever more each other find? Tear all the ties that bind. If we cannot make amends, all we shared that priceless was may well be lost. Departure from one's love comes at great cost. Broken hearts will never beat as well, my dear. So, should we separate or make amends? And in so making, lovers be again, and friends. You know, when we have spats, if we make amends, we retain a relationship that's precious. Otherwise, suffering, emotional suffering. I think we've all had such experiences. Now I'm going to share what I've already hinted at. It's a little secret. I used to be a Reformation historian, and I wrote 4 books on the Protestant Reformation. We won't go into these, but this poem is entitled A Brief History of the Protestant Reformation. Now, it did take me 3 years to write my dissertation and get my doctorate, considered quite swift. And I wrote history books for the next 12 years and read papers at history conventions. But you're lucky, because I'm going to give you the whole Protestant Reformation in a page and a half, and thereby spare you a great deal of suffering. So this poem is called A Brief History of the Protestant Reformation. Shaker, Quaker, Christian, faker, urge followers to fear their Maker. Those who did ignored deceivers, themselves posed as the true believers and went after those opposed with cleavers. Skeptics quaking, shaking, whirling, even Muslims, prostrate grievers, despised receivers of false traditions, false theological positions, immune to others' prohibitions. Rabbis heavy into Torah, Calvinists preaching Gomorrah, Lutherans following Martin and St. Augustine's grace, to which Catholics gave a nod, as well as to the triune God. He, all three, dispensed hope, the real dope, loading sects with obligations that defied some other nations, but with which the others had perforce to cope. Calvin's cruel predestinations, spurned now by his congregations, contented with just the fall, sir, plus Easter lilies on the altar. Anglicans owed their church to Henry VIII's male successor, not Catherine of Aragon, nor Anne Boleyn gave him one, but Jane Seymour at last birthed Edward VI, Henry's only son. Edward VI was frail, soon died, succeeded by Anne Boleyn's daughter, Liz, who was smart, determined, and great at the ruling biz. Appealing, she vaunted her virginity, which helped her break her palace's glass ceiling. All reviled, as was the case, Anabaptists, a vile race, so enamored of holy water, they dipped again, they hadn't order. Didn't baptize infants, but a child of 12 and adults, well instructed in their church, could be inducted. Jews and Muslims both despised, their lot as ever marginalized, excluded from the commonweal, despised, and scarce conceded human status. Unreal. So sad this sadly consequential deal. Each sect had its theology down pat, perhaps because all other churches were by the others dropped flat. Those who believed divine all God created were called pantheists, and so religiously condign. These last were, like Spinoza, an excommunicated Jew, respected by a very few. Religious history is as stained as most churches' stained glass windows, historically quite true. And still sin blows in from those windows stained so pretty. Does no sect realize they contribute to this tragedy? Pity. Well, the very next poem has to do with apprehension, and it's a dream poem. Apprehension is also, but I didn't put it here, I don't think. Oh yes, I did. A good poem for you to look up, word for you to look up in your dictionary. It has so many meanings. But I will just read it, play it as it lays. Apprehension, dream poem. Apprehension, like contention and dissension, may account for bad dreams, tension. But when you learn its definitions, you may find some apt remissions. The root includes to apprehend, seize the meaning, discern, believe, comprehend. Now those are forms of apprehend that may just mend the fearful heart, the rattled brain, which only knows the other swarm, views the future with alarm, dread, fear, recalls that apprehension means arrest, the fearful matter of bad dreams. While there's no cure when you're asleep for apprehension of that sort, there is at least one great and useful resort when you wake, the dictionary. You'll find applications that may overcome your fear, ideas, opinions. You'll learn apprehension's other meanings, positive, helpful, educational. All those bid to rid you of the dread that apprehension will reproduce, like nightmares in which you wind up dead. Once you've consulted Webster, your old friend and mine, you will sleep easier, knowing what you apprehend is often fine. I guess I thought, because I used to teach English, as well as history and French, other things, that knowing what words can do, their multiplicity of meanings, is very helpful to learning to read well, but also to think well and understand what you're reading better. Poem 18 is very topical because the Republican Party in the last several years has made much of a graduate level study of which I was not aware until Republicans began to talk about it. Critical race theory. It's the 18th poem in this book. I had to get out my dictionary, good old Webster's, your old friend and mine, and look up the various words in this subject, which I had never heard of. Critical race theory. So I looked up critical, and the first stanza of my poem is about critical. If you can't stomach critical race theory, you may not know what each word means. Critical comes from Greek, kritikos with a K, to discuss. Many folks believe that's better than to cuss. In fact, our First Amendment grants free speech. It means all are entitled to freely speak their mind, minus naysayers making any fuss, without discriminating against the them, but not the us. Free speech advances all of us, leaves no part of us behind. The second stanza is called Race. Let's now consider that troublesome word race. Among several definitions that Webster's gives, I find the most appealing word is humankind. Race, we understand, has played a major role in our supposedly free land. If we hope to make our children sages, race must be carefully explained in their U.S. history books' pages. Not all our citizens have been free. Embarrassment is not the point, though it does indeed embarrass me. Modern scholars using DNA have made it clear, despite differences in hair, in color of the skin, all human beings are more alike than not. All are closest kin. Some who denigrate those not white well know something quite unsavory. Our history of owning black and brown folks was the shamefulness of slavery. We must teach students that we had a civil war, that the Klan that later hung black victims up on trees still exists, that politicians who are fearful they may lose their place are, as I write this, trying hard to play the ugly card called race. They seek to present their game as something all might laud, discriminating against those they claim without convincing evidence of fraud. Race. Some who represent us discriminate. A disgrace. Now, stanza 3 deals with theory, critical race theory. Now for theory, from Greek theoria, meaning conclusions based on fact, and how they each with others interact. What theory doesn't mean is how a governor, church, policeman, school superintendent, etc. would like theory to seem something debatable, but not proved by data from honest researchers who put good proven facts upon the table. Some theories fail, of course, for want of the right facts. But where our history is concerned, we all, each one, carry its results upon our backs. What we cannot in the USA deny is that treatment of our poor, our non-white citizens, has proved unfair. To ignore the factual data is sadly to perpetuate another grievous lie. It seems since the elections of 2020, we've had a great many grievous lies circulating around the media and our society, and even in our House of Representatives and our Senate. Pity. Well, what can we do about that? We can be better informed. The next poem I read is called, and its number is 48, Mistake. Who doesn't make them now and then? We all make mistakes. I erred, was misinformed, mistaken, wrong, deluded, and deceived. But I admit what was deformed and have conceived to change that song that clashed with what you had first heard. I've changed the one fallacious word that caused your fear, your fright. I was mistaken. I confess that you were right. I've now reset the type. Forget the hype that did provoke your terror. Corrections of flawed thought are always fairer. As distortions not our better portion, when corrected, our flag, law, and feelings raw may yet be well protected. This is an apology for any mistake I may have made. And we all make them. There's nothing wrong with correcting ourselves when we have mistaken fantasy for fact. This poem is short, and you may be happy about that. It's poem number 58, and it's a dream poem. It's called, Oh, Yes, Dream Poem. Oh, yes, he was there again, I guess. I do guess, after all. Wouldn't you? I had slept half the night away, and through it all, his was the only image just that tall. His the only visage which, when smiling, and how often he did smile, seemed so beguiling, though not consciously at all. Oh yes, he was there again. I don't know who was there again, I'll be honest. Maybe I dreamt once that someone kept coming back to visit me and smiled at me. I had so many people in my youth and young womanhood that I loved dearly. Maybe it was an uncle. I had many uncles, and they all loved me and I them. Maybe it was my grandfather. who used to bring me a quarter every Sunday and a quart of ice cream and dine with us. And I, as a small child, would get out my bank and open up the bank on the floor and show him all my quarters. I think I wanted to show him that I was a saving soul and that I was worth getting another quarter next week. I don't know who that person who smiled at me was, but he came often in that dream.